and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson and presented in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Miami. Today on Wavescan, 100 Years of Wireless and Radio in Bulgaria, Part 9, Shortwave QSL Cards. More from the recent HFCC conference in Slovakia, and B13 frequencies for Wavescan, as well as other DX news. On this occasion here in Wavescan, we examine the multitude of QSL cards that Radio Sofia in Bulgaria has issued over the years. The Indianapolis Heritage Collection contains more than 130 QSL cards in various forms from the Bulgarian shortwave stations, with an additional pile of uncounted letters and greeting cards. Radio Sofia was noted in earlier years as a prolific verifier of listener reception reports, though they did operate under their own distinct procedures that were a little different from what other major stations had implemented. In earlier days, Radio Sofia Shortwave requested listeners to submit a sequence of reception reports within a stated period of time. And these reports would then be verified by a series of 6 QSL cards in a progressive sequence. After 6 QSL cards had been sent to the listener, then a diploma was available, and there were 3 progressive diplomas, bronze, silver, and gold. In order to obtain a gold diploma, at one stage it was necessary for the listener to send in a total of 63 reception reports within a period of somewhere around 70 weeks, a total time period of nearly 1.5 years. However, Radio Sofia did acknowledge many reception reports with the regular processing of QSL cards that were not linked to the diploma system. In addition, they also sent out New Year and Spring greeting cards, picture cards of Bulgaria, and letters of greeting that described various events and places of interest in the country. The earliest QSL response from Bulgaria in the Indianapolis collection is a self-prepared QSL card verifying the reception of station LZA on 14970 kHz on Sunday, September 27, 1936. This card was addressed to a listener in Canada. At the time, transmitter LZA was a low-powered operation, emitting just 1.5 kilowatts from a location near the railway station in Sofia. This Morse code transmitter had been recently modified for voice transmissions, and it was in use for communication traffic, as well as the broadcast of radio programming, usually on Sundays. The listener in Canada was tuned to shortwave LZA at the time when it was on the air with its regular Sunday programming, a relay from the local medium wave station in Sofia. In the era following the end of World War II, the regular QSL card issued by Radio Sofia was a stylized card depicting a map of Bulgaria with an artistic rendition of the popular Bulgarian rose in a side panel. This card was printed in pink and a shade of gray. Over an extended time period of around a quarter century, the main emphasis on the Bulgarian card was shown with various forms of maps depicting the country's location in Eastern Europe. These cards, always in color, also presented a radio tower with circular radio signals radiating from it. At this stage, some of these QSL cards were oversized, a little larger than the regular postcard of that era. The first of the multi-series of QSL cards associated with their diploma system was introduced in the late 1960s, and these depicted photographic scenes of tourist interest in Sofia in full color. A side panel presented the Radio Sofia motif, which at the time was a stylized block printed in black with a radio tower and the radiating radio signals in a circular pattern. A similar follow-up series of 6 cards showed additional tourist scenes throughout Bulgaria, and the side panel showed the same stylized motif, though the black identification block was smaller in size. For another period of time, extending to another quarter century, several more series of Radio Sofia shortwave QSL cards were prepared. Each of the cards in these series depicted Bulgarian tourist scenes, and the side panel in 2 or perhaps 3 different shades of brown over a period of time presented an updated version of the stylized Radio Sofia motif as a cluster of off-center transmission circles. Beginning in the late 1990s, a new series of very modernistic art paintings was prepared, and again these were in full color. These cards are intended to depict traditional scenes in Bulgaria, the performance of modern music, modern depictions of ancient tribal art, and Radio Sofia itself. Interestingly, all of the above-mentioned QSL cards, printed by the multi-thousand, are presented in the English language. However, some of the same QSL card designs were also printed with the text in German and some with the text in French.
This is Radio Sofia, Bulgaria. This is Radio Sofia, Bulgaria.
Regional radio stations in Bulgaria have also issued their own QSLs, in addition to the capital city-based international shortwave service from Radio Sofia itself. For example, QSL cards and sometimes letters have been issued from the regional shortwave service in Radio Varna, near the Black Sea coastal tourist area. Likewise, from the regional medium-wave station Radio Sagora in the northeast of the country, and also from the home service shortwave station Radio Horizont, with its own postal address in Sofia. We might also add that Radio Moscow has issued a few QSL cards for the relay of its own programming on shortwave from the large shortwave stations in Bulgaria, though the actual transmitter location has not always been correctly identified on the card. Then, too, the Voice of America has issued its own QSL cards from their head office in Washington, D.C., for their shortwave relay service via Bulgaria. We hold just one card from VOA Bulgaria. This card shows a brilliant morning sunrise as seen through the curtain antennas at the VOA relay station in Greenville, North Carolina, and it verifies the reception of their relay via a 250 kilowatt transmitter on 13680 kHz at Plovdiv in Bulgaria. We plan to return to the radio scene in Bulgaria next month, when you'll hear the interesting story of special radio programming presented for the benefit of shortwave listeners living in Bulgaria.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Last week on Wavescan, we had the first part of a report about the recent High-Frequency Coordination Conference in Bratislava, Slovakia. And today we continue with Part 2. The Slovak company TowerCom operates Slovakia's large shortwave station in Rimavská Sobota, which is currently unused since Radio Slovakia International discontinued its shortwave broadcasts at the end of 2010. On Tuesday at the HFCC conference, Juraj Vodny and Edita Hoholata of TowerCom gave a presentation about shortwave broadcasting in Slovakia. TowerCom is the nationwide provider of broadcasting services in Slovakia related to terrestrial TV and radio transmitters, satellite uplink services, and the statewide network of microwave links. On the radio side, TowerCom provides nationwide service for Slovakia's public radio broadcaster and commercial radio license holders. Transmission of analog radio signals is carried out by AM broadcasting in the medium wave and shortwave bands, and by FM broadcasting including RDS services. In March 2006, Towercom conducted the first digital radio broadcast in Slovakia using the DRM system in the medium wave band. Juraj Vodny explained that the first shortwave broadcasts in Slovakia began in 1949 from a station in Veľké Kostolany in the west of Slovakia. There were 4 transmitters with 100 kilowatts of output power. In 1970, the transmitters were renewed and new antennas were added. The Rimavská Sobota broadcasting station was built in southeastern Slovakia in 1956. It began with 2 100-kilowatt Tesla transmitters. In 1982, the transmitters were upgraded to 250 kilowatts. The station has a total of 15 shortwave antennas. Each of the transmitters can be switched to any of the 15 shortwave antennas which cover all parts of the world. Although it's currently off the air, Towercom hopes to resume shortwave operation with analog broadcasting during the B-13 season using existing antenna systems. This is assuming the Slovak government allocates new funding to Radio Slovakia International. In the future, Towercom hopes to add digital DRM broadcasts on shortwave. Ladia Hudzovichova works at the Spanish service at Radio Slovakia International. You can hear her on the air almost daily. She was also the primary local organizer of the HFCC conference in Bratislava. Shortly after the Towercom presentation on Tuesday afternoon, Ladia led most of the conference attendees on a walking tour of Old Town Bratislava. On a 20-minute walk from the Sheraton Hotel beside the Danube River, you can see some marvelous views of the bridges which cross the Danube, one of which has a flying saucer-shaped restaurant atop it, appropriately named UFO. You can also see the landmark Bratislava Castle on the hillside above the river. Then you turn north and walk into Old Town, passing by numerous historical buildings and plazas. Our first stop was a small 3-room gallery to see an exhibition of photos from the Bratislava Spring of 1968. Many people are aware of the Prague Spring in 1968, when Czechoslovak communist leader Alexander Dubček began social reforms that were halted by an invasion on August 21st by Soviet and other Warsaw Pact military forces. What many outsiders don't realize is that similar actions occurred in Slovakia, known as the Bratislava Spring. The photo exhibition included a famous picture by Slovak photographer Ladislav Bielik of a protester named Emil Galu confronting a Soviet tank. We were also able to hear recordings of some historic broadcasts of Slovak radio during the invasion, urging citizens to stand up to the invaders. After the photo exhibit, Ladia took us on a walk through other historic sites in Old Town Bratislava, including the site of a Jewish synagogue that had been destroyed during the Second World War. We ended up in a very interesting open-air theater where we watched an English-language version of a play by a well-known Soviet writer of the early 20th century. Walking back to the Sheraton along the Danube River, we were able to get a fairly close view of some of the large river cruise ships that ply the major rivers of Europe these days, including the Danube, stopping
channel usually broadcasts live concerts which are held here.
We also saw radio drama studios with all sorts of sound effects, which aren't used much anymore, since these effects can now be achieved with computers. The ground floor contains a very nice exhibition of photos depicting the history of Slovak radio, along with assorted historical transmitter and studio parts and equipment, and a selection of antique radio receivers, shortwave and otherwise. The building has a few floors below ground and several above, each one about 7 meters wider than the one beneath it, thus producing the inverted pyramid look. On the ground floor, there's actually a small guest house that's open to the public. Incidentally, Slovak television is located in another building in Bratislava. The inverted pyramid contains only the radio. On the outskirts of Bratislava, on a hill with an excellent view of the city below, is the Kamzik television tower. Edita Hoholata and her colleagues from TowerCom arranged a special visit for us to this site, which began with a short film about TowerCom and its installations throughout the country. Next was a stop at the master control room with monitors for the various television channels that are transmitted from the tower, and another stop at the floor where the TV and FM transmitters are located. On the master control room level, it was possible to walk outside on a small ledge to have a magnificent view of the city of Bratislava below. From Kamzik, the bus took us some 20 kilometers into the countryside in the wine-producing region that surrounds Bratislava, to the small town of Slovenský Grob, where there are several restaurants that serve the local specialty, goose. The most famous of them, the Golden Goose, was our destination. As we got out of the buses and entered the restaurant, a group of 20 Slovakian folk musicians and dancers called Krakowienka greeted us with traditional tunes of the country, like this one, which is actually performed by another group. It was quite a spectacular sight. Greeting us at the restaurant was RSI chief Maria Mikushova and her husband Dusan, a print journalist who writes for a literary newspaper. The menus for the evening included soup in a bread bowl, roast goose, of course, and vegetarian items. All during the dinner, the folkloric group entertained HFCC delegates with music and dance, including the entertaining Slovakian hat dance. Well, while some delegates got a later than normal start on Thursday morning, the frequency coordination work continued throughout the day. The Thursday session ended with the closing plenary. After a final round of coordination on Friday morning, the HFCC ASBU conference ended with a closing lunch. Many delegates said their goodbyes and began their journeys back home on Friday afternoon. But 20 of us took part in a bus tour to see the highlights of Budapest, Hungary, only 3 hours away from Bratislava. The tour was led by a very pleasant lady in her 80s named Eva, who was born in a region of northern Hungary which later became part of Slovakia. She speaks Hungarian as her native language and knows the city of Budapest very well.
So now our plan, we approach Budapest, then our plan is to visit the citadel, the ancient fortress, from which is a beautiful view. You can see the whole, almost the whole city. After that, we take you by bus to show the historical center of the city.
Leaving Bratislava just after lunch, we knew this would be a quick tour of Budapest, with time to see only the highlights of this jewel of the Danube. The bus first went to the top of the Citadella, an old fortress located strategically atop the Gellert Hill. The view over the city and the Danube from here is absolutely spectacular, and everyone took pictures in front of the impressive background. Later, the bus went into central Budapest to drive by historic sites. We saw a large synagogue, some of the major hotels, the House of Terror, where the Hungarian secret police interrogated people during the communist era, the Parliament building and square, and the National Museum, just in front of the Hungarian National Radio building. Finally, we stopped near the famous pedestrian street, Váci utca, for some sightseeing and souvenir shopping for an hour or so. Later, the bus took us to a typical Hungarian restaurant for a nice dinner and folk music with our colleagues from the United States, China, Tunisia, Algeria, Oman, and Russia. And in case you're interested, you can find a selection of photos from the HFCC ASBU V13 conference on the NASB's Facebook page, which is www.facebook.com/NASB Shortwave. You might want to get out a paper and pen now, because we're going to give you the B13 schedule for Wavescan via the Adventist World Radio stations. This begins on the 27th of October and is in effect until the 29th of March of 2014. Wavescan will be heard from Nauen in Germany at 15:30 UTC, and these are all Sunday broadcasts. Sunday at 15:30 UTC to primarily Nepal and Tibet on 11,750 kilohertz, 11750. Also at 1600 UTC from KSDA in Guam, beamed primarily to southern India on 15,660 kilohertz, 15660. Also from KSDA at 2230 UTC to the west of Indonesia on 15,320 kilohertz, 15320. Another one from KSDA is at 2330 UTC towards Vietnam on 17700 kilohertz, 17700. And finally from KSDA at 1600 UTC to central India on 15215 kilohertz, 15215. And of course you can hear these broadcasts beyond the areas that we've mentioned as the primary targets as well. That's Wavescan as of October 27th from the AWR stations. If you're a regular listener to Wavescan, you have undoubtedly heard us make frequent mention of the excellent books by the well-known American shortwave listener and DXer Jerry Berg about shortwave broadcasting and listening. Well, we're pleased to see that his fourth book on shortwave history has just been published by McFarland & Company. It's called The Early Shortwave Stations, and it's a 340-page softcover book with a year-by-year chronicle of the shortwave stations that were on the air in the period from 1923 until 1945. After a brief explanation of the prelude to shortwave broadcasting, Jerry's book starts with the famous U.S. station KDKA and its shortwave simulcast, which was an important event in a technological revolution that would make dependable worldwide radio communication possible for the first time. In subsequent years, other stations around the world followed suit, using shortwave to extend reception in their own countries and to reach audiences abroad. The Early Shortwave Stations examines the birth and operation of the large international broadcasters, many of which would have an important role in World War II, as well as smaller stations that were of great interest to DXers. The Early Shortwave Stations is available from McFarland. You can find more information at their website, www.mcfarlandpub.com. That's www.mcfarlandpub.com. You can also find the Early Shortwave Stations at major e-book providers such as Google Play and Amazon Kindle. Our editor, Adrian Peterson, will have more about this book and other important shortwave publications early in the new year here on Wavescan. Colorful music from Madagascar off the southeastern coast of Africa. ends today's Wavescan, courtesy of our friends at World Christian Broadcasting's Madagascar World Voice station, coming hopefully in the not-too-distant future. You've been listening to Wavescan, the weekly DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson. Next week, the 75th anniversary of the Voice of Turkey on shortwave, and our Australian DX report. If you'd like a QSL card from Wavescan, you can send your reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. You can email us your comments and suggestions for the program to wavescan@awr.org. That's wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at WRMI in Miami. Till next time, everyone, good listening.
Pindateci hule hule, panama hule le mabula ya henane zai. Ai henane zai huye ne henane ke tike uke. Kayenge buwa ke tisikala bundu huye ne hata butepe. Huye ne huya ba mala tanu sanga kiramu. Huya ba paradanu sanga tiramu. No visirando ti andu, ufutu zeti tane tu, tane ai sua fude, tindati timi hule hule, tindati timi hule hule, panama hule le mabula ya henane zai, ai henane zai huyende henane keti ke uke. Sikala bundu huyende hada butekwe.